It started with a suitcase. I was 11 when my parents told me I'd be staying with friends for a bit. No explanation, no timeline, just my bag zipped and waiting by the front door when I got home from school. They drove me to the Morrisons' house that same evening. The Morrisons were people we saw at church sometimes. They had 3 kids already, 2 boys and a girl around my age, and lived in a small 3-bedroom house on the edge of town. It was obvious from the moment we pulled into their driveway that this wasn't a vacation or a slumber party. Their front porch light flickered, and the lawn looked like it hadn't been mowed in a while. The vibe was temporary storage, not warm welcome. My parents said they'd be going on a work sabbatical. They kept using that phrase like it was something I should be excited for. They said it was an opportunity of a lifetime. They didn't cry. They didn't hug me tight. They didn't promise to visit. Just a quick kiss on the forehead and a be good. I shared a bunk bed with their youngest daughter. She didn't talk much, and her brothers ignored me completely. There was no space for me in their routine. I didn't get added to the chore chart or offered a spot at the dinner table. I just found space where I could. My after-school stuff stopped. No more music lessons. Gymnastics, done. I didn't even ask. I already knew the answer. The Morrisons weren't mean. They just had their hands full. I was extra. Their pantry wasn't stocked with my snacks. No one knew I didn't like mayo. I was invisible in the way that makes you tired. At first, my parents called once a week, Sunday evenings. Then it slipped to once a month. Then 4 months went by with nothing. I'd still leave my phone beside my pillow each night, full battery, just in case, but it never lit up. At school, teachers asked about parent-teacher conferences and emergency contacts. I said my parents worked abroad and were hard to reach. I figured that lie was easier than saying, I don't know where my parents are. One day, I used the Morrisons' desktop to print a school report. Their email was still open. I saw a message from my mom to Mrs. Morrison. It said, "Thanks again for managing her longer than expected. We're still figuring out the next leg of our trip." The subject line was Thailand itinerary. I stopped waiting for updates after that. I started getting myself up for school in the mornings. I made toast, packed my own lunch, did my own laundry. The Morrisons weren't neglectful. They were just focused on their own lives. I learned to stay out of the way. I turned 12 in that house. No phone call, no card. Mrs. Morrison handed me a keychain from Walgreens with my name on it and said, "Sorry, things have been hectic." I told her thanks and put it in my pencil case. It's still there in a zipper I never open. A few weeks later, I was using a friend's tablet in the library during recess. She was scrolling through Facebook and clicked on a photo from someone I barely recognized, a family friend from church. There were my parents, sitting at an outdoor cafe in Paris. Another photo popped up, them posing with elephants in Chiang Mai. Then one on a boat in Greece. They'd been tagging along with some retired friends, hopping from country to country. In the comments, someone asked where I was. My mom replied, "She's with some good friends from church." It's been a healthy break for all of us. Not once did they ask if I was doing okay. 8 months after they dropped me off, they returned. The front door creaked open one afternoon after school, and there they were, sun-kissed, shopping bags in hand, acting like they'd just gotten back from Costco. My mom opened her arms wide and said, "We missed you." My dad added, "Didn't you have a great time with the Morrisons?" I didn't say much, just went upstairs, unpacked the bag I hadn't seen in months, and folded the clothes like it was any other Sunday. Nothing changed for them. But something had changed for me. They expected everything to click back into place like it was a long weekend. Like I just returned from camp and had funny stories to tell. I ate dinner with them that night. I listened. I nodded. I didn't bring up the Morrisons. I didn't ask where they'd been. I didn't show them the stack of worksheets I'd signed myself or the certificate from the school spelling bee I'd won in March. I sat there watching them talk over each other about travel delays and jet lag, about which souvenirs to give which relatives. I kept quiet, chewing slowly, hands folded in my lap. They never noticed that I barely spoke. I went to bed early that night, stared at the ceiling, and realized I hadn't seen my bedroom in nearly a year. The posters were the same, the shelves untouched, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. I didn't fight. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stopped expecting anything. That was the year that didn't count. And from that point on, I started planning for the rest of my life, without them in it. After they brought me home, I didn't argue. I didn't ask questions. I became quiet, polite, and helpful. They called it maturity. I didn't correct them. I woke myself up for school every morning, packed my own lunches, and kept my room spotless. I got straight A's, turned in assignments on time, and stayed out of trouble. No talking back, no attitude, no mess. I never brought up the Morrisons. I didn't ask where my old gymnastics gear went or why my music books had been boxed up in the attic. I acted like nothing had ever changed because that's what they were doing. They took it as a good sign. I took it as my cue. At 14, I started babysitting around the neighborhood. I told them I wanted to learn responsibility. They beamed, told me how proud they were, and bragged about me at church. I started tucking most of the money away in a shoebox behind my dresser. No one checked. No one asked. That winter, I caught a bad flu. I had a fever, chills, and couldn't get out of bed. I asked for soup. My mom poked her head into my room and said, "You're not a baby anymore. You'll be fine." She left a box of tissues on my desk and walked away. I learned to make simple meals by watching YouTube videos at the library after school: scrambled eggs, grilled cheese, pasta. I started doing my own grocery shopping when I got tired of waiting for food I liked to appear in the fridge. When they took a family road trip the next summer, I sat quietly in the backseat while they played car games and made jokes with each other. I wasn't invited into the conversation. I didn't try to join. At the rest stops, I bought my own snacks with babysitting money and made sure to sit by the window. One night, I overheard my mom on the phone with a friend. She was standing in the hallway, not realizing I was upstairs. She said I was so independent now and that she barely had to parent anymore. She sounded proud, like she'd trained a dog to open doors. Another time during dinner, my dad made a joke about how I was like a self-cleaning oven. The room laughed. I forced a smile. I never forgot the phrase. By the time I turned 16, I had a plan. I met with my school counselor on my own and asked about early graduation. I doubled up on classes, took extra credit assignments, and skipped the junior prom to finish coursework. They thought I was just motivated. They had no idea I was mapping my escape. That year, I started researching colleges, only out-of-state ones. I applied for financial aid, scholarships, and housing all on my own. I used the school computers to fill out forms. I didn't use their tax documents. I didn't ask for signatures. I figured it out. When I got the acceptance letter from a university 900 miles away, I waited until the very last week to mention it. I handed them the envelope at dinner. My mom glanced at the name and said, "That's pretty far." My dad grinned and said, "Guess we raised you too well, huh?" There was no family meeting, no debate. They didn't offer to visit the campus with me. They didn't ask about dorms or classes. They just nodded and made vague comments about flights. When the day came, they dropped me off at the airport. My suitcase was half filled with thrifted clothes, secondhand textbooks, and a small folder of printed documents. I had $1,200 saved in that shoebox and a prepaid phone plan in my name. They hugged me briefly at the terminal and said, "Call us when you get there." I nodded and walked straight to the security line. I never called. I blocked both their numbers before the plane took off, not out of spite. Not as a message. I just didn't want any more fake check-ins or birthday texts that came 4 days late. On the plane, I looked out the window and didn't feel anything. No nerves, no excitement, just the sound of a clean break. When I landed, I took a cab to the dorms, checked in, and introduced myself to my roommate like I'd always lived alone. No one asked who dropped me off. No one cared, and that was fine. And in my first week, I opened a checking account, got a campus job at the dining hall, and signed up for student orientation events. I made a schedule, posted it above my desk, and stuck to it. There was no going back. I didn't burn any bridges. I just stopped crossing the ones they left to rot. College gave me something I hadn't had in years, space that was actually mine. I didn't have to tiptoe around anyone's moods or routines. I didn't owe anyone updates. I just moved, worked, and kept going. I got a job at a 24-hour diner a few blocks from campus. Took late shifts, sometimes doubles on weekends. The manager liked that I didn't complain and never showed up late. I used the money for rent, books, groceries, and a prepaid transit pass. I bought my own winter coat during a clearance sale in October. It wasn't stylish, but it was warm. My roommate asked once why I never called my parents. I told her they were always busy with their own stuff. She didn't ask again. On Thanksgiving, I stayed on campus. Walked to the corner store and bought boxed mac and cheese and a pumpkin-flavored soda that tasted like regret. At Christmas, I helped a friend decorate their tiny apartment with dollar store lights and paper snowflakes. No one from home invited me. No one checked in. At 19, I landed an internship in another city through a connection from one of my professors. I packed my things, found a Craigslist sublet, and moved within 2 weeks. I didn't tell anyone except my landlord and my work-study supervisor. There were no goodbyes. No one asked where I went. I updated my resume that summer and decided to start using my grandmother's maiden name, Daliel. Not legally, just on paper. On email signatures, applications, and my class project credits. It made things cleaner, lighter. It felt like mine. When the internship ended, I didn't go back to campus. I signed a lease on a small apartment, just enough space for a bed, a desk, and a table. I bought mismatched dishes from a thrift store and put up blackout curtains. I adopted a cat from the shelter and named her Sparrow. She was quiet, skittish, and slept curled up near my bookshelves. We understood each other. For my 21st birthday, I stayed in, made a small cake from scratch, burned the first one, made another, poured a glass of cheap wine and watched an old movie I liked. No phone calls, no messages, just one day rolling into the next. A cousin I hadn't spoken to since I was 10 sent me a DM on Instagram later that month. Said something like, "Why don't you ever come to family things anymore?" I didn't answer, just closed the app. That same week, my dad sent me an email with the subject line, "Hey stranger." I didn't open it. I deleted it right away, emptied the trash, and muted the address. A few days later, a Christmas card arrived at my apartment. My name was written in my mom's handwriting on the envelope. Inside was a folded photo of my parents in matching sweaters beside a decorated tree. Their names were signed at the bottom in red ink. I wasn't in the photo. There was no message. They still didn't understand. They thought I was just busy, like they'd once been. I graduated at 22, with honors. My name was listed in the ceremony program. My photo went up on the wall in the department building. I wore the gown, stood in line, shook hands, and picked up my diploma folder. My boss at the diner sent me a bouquet of flowers. My roommate's parents mailed me a card. My parents weren't there, not because they weren't welcome, because they weren't informed. That summer, I found a therapist who worked on a sliding scale, paid for it out of pocket. I didn't go to talk about them. I went to understand how you could grow up in a house, sleep under the same roof, and still end up erased. After a few months, I stopped thinking of myself as estranged. That word made it sound like I'd been pushed out, but no one pushed. I just quietly stepped away, the same way they once had. No confrontation, no announcements. I wasn't a daughter anymore. Not legally, not emotionally. Just a name they used on Christmas cards and mailing lists. And I preferred it that way. At 24, I came home from my late shift at the diner and found a cream-colored envelope wedged halfway under my apartment door. The handwriting on the front was unfamiliar, flowing cursive, no return address. Inside was a folded note. No greeting. Just, "We're in town for a few days. I would love to take you out for dinner. Let us know where works best, Mom, Dad." I didn't reply. I didn't react. I slid the letter into the back of a drawer with some old tax forms and forgot about it. A week passed. During my Saturday night shift, my manager poked his head into the back room and said there was a couple asking for me. Said they claimed to be my parents. I stayed in the break room. They sat at a booth near the window for nearly an hour, ordered coffee, barely touched it. I watched the clock. I waited 2 hours before stepping out, long after they'd gone. The next morning, I rearranged my availability at work, picked up late-night shifts, traded Saturdays for weekdays, anything to lower the odds of seeing them again. 3 days later, the diner's landline rang during lunch rush. My coworker answered, paused, then mouthed to me, "It's your parents." I walked past her without stopping. "They left a voicemail on the machine. We're worried about you. Please let us take you to dinner. We miss you." I asked my manager to let anyone who asks know I didn't work there anymore. He nodded and didn't ask why. That week, I signed a lease for a small one-bedroom across town, month to month. No furniture except my mattress, a secondhand table, and a folding chair. I told my boss I was moving and updated my address with payroll. That was it. When I went back to clean out my old apartment, my neighbor stopped me in the hallway. She held up her phone, photo of a card taped to my door, white cardstock. Written in blue ink, "Will always be your home." I told her to throw it away. I unpacked that night with music on full volume. Boiled pasta in a scratched pot. Ate standing up by the sink. No flashbacks, no silence, just noise. A few days later, my cousin Nathan emailed me from his office address. Subject line, "Hey, everything okay?" I didn't answer. I hadn't seen him since I was 10, and he hadn't seen me when I was 12 and waiting for a birthday that never came. That weekend, I went to a hardware store and bought a fireproof safe. Small, lockable, heavy. I placed every card, every letter, and the new note from the door inside it. Not for memories, just for keeping them sealed. I didn't block them. I didn't tell anyone what happened. I just made sure that if they showed up again, I wouldn't be anywhere they recognized. And I didn't leave a forwarding address. At 26, I got a mass email from a cousin announcing her wedding. The message was simple. Save the date, location, RSVP link. I noticed I'd been CC'd along with half the extended family. Buried between names I hadn't seen in years were my parents. I ignored it for a few days. Then I scrolled back through and saw a personal line she'd added at the end. "Would love to reconnect. We missed you growing up." I replied, "Congratulations, I won't be attending. All the best." Short, direct. I hit send. The next day, she messaged again, this time directly, said she understood the situation, and that my parents wouldn't be involved in anything beyond the ceremony. No roles, no speeches. I thought about it for another week. Then I booked a hotel room 2 towns over and planned to show up just for the rehearsal dinner. Not for them, but for the handful of family members who hadn't earned guilt by association. I arrived late, slipped in through the back, sat at a small table in the corner, and picked at the salad. Kept conversation light. Names, jobs, weather. Halfway through dinner, my parents walked in. My dad scanned the tables. My mom's smile faltered when she spotted me. Her expression didn't change. Neither did mine. They didn't approach. I didn't move. We coexisted in the same room, like strangers who looked too much alike. My aunt tried to play mediator, came over, gestured toward the main table, and said there was room. I thanked her and stayed seated. Later that night, I stepped out to the hallway to take a call from my rideshare driver. Before I could finish, my mom appeared. No hello, just, "We never stopped loving you." I raised my hand and said, "Don't start." She didn't speak again. I walked past her, straight to the parking lot. At sunrise, I checked out of my hotel, didn't attend the ceremony. No note, no announcement. Just a long drive home with the GPS volume turned off. That week, I mailed a gift to the bride, boxed, wrapped, and shipped with tracking. Inside was a note, "Sorry I had to leave early. Wishing you peace." A few days later, I got a handwritten thank you card. No mention of my parents. No apology for the ambush. Just a clean, neutral message. I respected that. Back at my apartment, I opened the closet and pulled out a photo I hadn't touched in years. It was from a school play, me in a cardboard crown, front row. My mom had framed it and left it behind when she'd moved out of the old house. I didn't burn it. I didn't keep it. I placed it in a donation box with an old shoebox full of outdated notebooks, trinkets, and a single unused birthday card that still said from Mom and Dad. The donation truck came the next morning. I handed the box over and watched it disappear into the back without a second glance. Nothing else needed to be said. At 28, I got a letter in the mail from a law firm I didn't recognize. Plain envelope, typed label, generic return address. The letter inside was short, a request to get in touch regarding a family matter, with a case number and a phone number at the bottom. I left it on the counter for a week, then 2. After that, I folded it in half and stuffed it between takeout menus. By the 3rd week, curiosity edged in. I called, not the case contact, but the front desk line printed on the firm's website. When the receptionist picked up, I used a fake name. I asked if they could tell me anything about the file linked to the number in the letter. She paused, said something about power of attorney, mentioned emergency care, then asked if I was calling on behalf of a relative. I ended the call without answering. That night, an email landed in my inbox. The sender name was unfamiliar, no subject. The first line read, "Your father had a heart attack. We're trying to reach family." I closed it, didn't reply, didn't delete it either. Just moved it to a folder I never checked. The next day, another envelope. This one handwritten, my aunt's name in the corner. Inside was a letter. Ink smudged near the edges like someone had written it quickly. She wrote that my dad was asking to see me, just once. That he might not have much time left. That I should please come home. I folded the letter neatly, slid it into its envelope, and carried it to the fireproof box where all the others lived. It joined the pile without ceremony. 2 weeks passed. No calls, no texts. Then another email arrived. This one sounded less urgent. Said my dad had made it through surgery and was recovering. That he hoped we could reconcile. I left it unread. I didn't forward it to my work email. I didn't print it to think about later. I just let it sit. Later that month, my boss asked during our weekly meeting if I needed time off for personal matters. I told him I was fine. He didn't push. A friend I saw regularly for coffee mentioned they'd be willing to drive with me if I needed to visit family. I thanked her and changed the subject. A few days later, another letter showed up. My mother's handwriting this time. She started with a line I hadn't seen before. "We were just trying to figure things out back then. It wasn't about you. I didn't read the rest. I packed the letter with the others. Same routine. Same result. The weather started shifting to fall, cooler mornings, later sunsets. I cleared out my closet and donated a few old coats, swept the balcony, refilled Sparrow's food container. A month later, a coworker mentioned they'd seen a post from someone in my extended family. My dad was doing much better in reconnecting with everyone but me. No one asked why. And I didn't offer a reason. There was nothing left to explain. By 30, my life had become steady. I owned a one-bedroom condo with my name alone on the deed. I worked a job that gave me benefits and left me enough time to take walks before dinner. My calendar had birthdays, dentist appointments, deadlines, but never family visits. Coworkers knew me as the quiet one who always had her reports done early. My neighbors waved when we passed in the hallway. No one ever used the word daughter when talking about me. One Tuesday, I found a letter from a retirement facility tucked into my mailbox. It wasn't addressed to me by name, just to next of kin. Inside was a brochure, an emergency contact form, and a page listing my parents as new residents. They'd listed me on their intake paperwork. My phone number, my name. The number hadn't changed since college. They just hadn't dialed it, until now, through someone else's office. I went to the facility the next day, walked into the front desk, showed the letter, and asked to speak to a coordinator. I didn't mention my relationship to them. I just asked to be removed from all forms, all future contact. She nodded and typed something into a system. No questions asked. Before I left, the coordinator said casually, "They seem like a charming couple." I thanked her and walked out without replying. A month later, my former boss retired and held a small dinner at his house. I went, brought a bottle of wine, and caught up with old coworkers. At the table, I was seated next to a woman who used to work in education. She introduced herself, asked where I was from, then paused. She repeated my last name, asked if I was Nancy's daughter. She said they'd been college roommates. I smiled and said, "Not anymore." That night, I went home and opened the fireproof box that had lived in my closet for years. Inside were every card, letter, and envelope my parents had ever sent. I took them out one by one and fed them through the shredder. No rush, just steady motions until the box was empty. Afterward, I opened every window in the condo and let the air move through. It was quiet except for Sparrow scratching at her bowl. 2 weeks later, I received a wedding invitation from a younger cousin I barely remembered. No assumptions. No mention of family ties. Just my name and a +1 space left blank. I went. The wedding was outdoors. Warm lights strung across the trees. The music soft. The people kind. No one asked about my parents. A few glanced at me like they were curious, but no one asked the question. When the bride and groom danced, I stood near the edge of the floor with a glass of champagne. I didn't belong there, but for once, I didn't feel like I needed to.